Mary Chege is a lawyer and principal at EMSI Associates with over 17 years experience in advising a broad range of transactions across Sub-Saharan Africa. In episode 3 of the Future Cities Africa series focusing on urban governance and how to get it right in managing urban growth in towns and cities in Kenya, this episode will explore financing infrastructure development in cities and urban areas. Mary, welcome. What is the situation or the current state of infrastructure financing in Kenya cities and towns?
Essentially, how the funds are allocated, especially for infrastructure financing. This is pretty much governed by existing laws, starting with the Constitution. And, at the constitutional level, we have the national government then accruing all the revenue that is necessary, and basically, this comes from taxes and levies and other borrowings. So from the national government revenues, then we have allocations to county governments. It's called the equitable share, and that is capped at about a minimum of 15%. Of total national revenues. So a minimum of 15% then goes towards county governments, is allocated towards county governments. That has been around 28, sometimes almost 35%, and then is then allocated towards the towards the different 47 counties. So this money then the counties then are able to allocate as per their own needs towards their own priorities. The other way that infrastructure is funded, in our towns and cities, is through the county's own source revenues again, which is a constitutionally, enabled revenue source for them, and one of the key sources of revenue for them, as far as own source revenues are concerned, is collection of property rates. Unfortunately, most of the counties, when you look at historical records, are not even collecting up to 20% of what they could collect on property rates, and therefore then you find that there's a really huge reliance on the transfers that they receive from the national government. So every county, every year, based on their own source revenues and the monies that they are expecting to receive from the national government, then will have an annual finance act that then essentially then will have thresholds for all the amount of money that they can collect, whether it's taxes, levies, fees from their citizens within their jurisdiction. And there are thresholds that then are approved every year by their county assemblies. One of the things then that they're able to do is then, they're obliged to have CIDPs, that's County Integrated Development Plans, that then now this money then needs to be allocated over the medium, can't even call it long term because it's a 5-year plan, medium term, towards now all the needs of the county's, development budget. Some of the more marginalized counties then will also receive an additional allocation from the national government under what is called an equalization fund, and that is very specific towards things like education institutions, roads, water, sanitation, infrastructure. And this really applies to those county governments that were historically very, very marginalized. Other ways that infrastructure is funded at that level is also through conditional or conditional grants, that then you find that the national government borrows at the national treasury level. You have then an implementing agency, either a ministry at the national level, and the borrowing is done through the national treasury, and then funds are allocated to participating counties. So you'll find like the Kenya Urban Support Program, World Bank funded, that then targets and allocates resources to about 45 counties. I think now Nairobi and Mombasa excluded. You'll find one of the programs that the Nairobi Metropolitan Area Services Improvement Program targeted 5 counties, including the county, the city county. And those are pretty much, the key sources. Then, of course, the counties then can borrow. They have the mandate to borrow under the Public Finance Management Act. However, there are restrictions on borrowing. Long-term borrowing has to be approved, has to receive a national government guarantee through Parliament, has to be approved by the county assemblies. Short-term borrowings, are also permissible, but of course, that would not be suitable for long-term infrastructure needs. Again, if you look at, the restrictions on county government borrowings, you can't borrow more than 20% of your, you can borrow more than 20% of your last audited accounts, and your debt service ratios should not exceed 15%. So there is there's quite some limitations on borrowings, but that is happening. And then of course you've got things, you've got the county securities, these are county bonds that can be issued by county governments. At the moment, I don't think there's any, there have been discussions around county bonds, but none has actually issued, gone all the way. There's some that have been rated by, I think, GCR, so that then they're able to raise these bonds, but none have actually gone all the way. Then, of course, you've got special funds. So you find things like the road annuity fund that was targeted at 10,000 rural and urban roads. Infrastructure. You'll find there, there were other funds such as, I think a long time ago, there was some slum upgrading fund, some $4 million fund, nobody quite knows what happened. And then of course, road maintenance levy funds, that's a portion of the, whatever price we pay for fuel goes towards a road maintenance levy that then counties then receive on an annual basis. But this is really very nominal amounts, and you'll find that most of the counties then will use it just for marraming or upgrading very rural roads, but really does not go towards key infrastructure. So there is, of course, then the opportunity for county governments to participate in PPPs, but we don't yet have a county that has run with a PPP from beginning to the end. A lot of support is still received at the national government level. I think there is, you'll find like one of the counties like Nakuru County has started PPP in the affordable housing area. I think they also have support from the World Bank. You'll find that Nairobi County has been trying to do something around the sanitation area, waste management and energy generation. But and then there are others around the water sector, but none have actually materialized and has been implemented. So I think that pretty much covers how cities and urban areas are funding their infrastructure.
So it sounds like there are many funding options, but from the conversations that I've been having, it seems like infrastructure financing is an issue. What can be done to shore up financing for infrastructure development in Kenya's urban areas?
If you think about, the estimates we are seeing, I think the last estimates we saw from the World Bank is that Kenya alone has an infrastructure financing deficit, not need, deficit of about $2.1 billion per annum. So that's a huge amount. So it is correct what you're hearing, that yeah, there may be lots of avenues to raise this money, but then there is a huge deficit. And then of course you find, the Commission for Revenue Allocation that then is responsible for monitoring how county governments are actually utilizing the funds that they receive both from national government and their own resources, will tell you that one, there's a continued decrease in the amount of own source revenues that the counties are raising. There's an over-reliance on national government funding. And, at the national government level, there is a deficit. So what else can they do? One of the exercises we did with some of our colleagues through a project that was funded by UN Habitat was just to undertake just a quick analysis of, we took the affordable housing program where the country was supposed to have 500,000 houses, affordable houses built between 2017 and 2022. 500,000 homes that would have cost anything from $6,000 to $30,000. And when we worked out based on the estimates that had been provided by the State Department of Housing, we were looking at 25% of the cost of the house would accrue towards on-site infrastructure and 20% towards off-site infrastructure. So that's the bulk and connecting infrastructure, and then of course the internal infrastructure to service these developments. And those amounts themselves were about 135 billion to 600 billion. That's about 1.3 to 6 billion dollars. So I think you already know that that project, not much has happened. I don't think we have even 200,000 houses, 100,000 houses. And some of the things we're looking at is, what are some of the challenges? And of course, we're looking at long-term planning. And I'm sure you've interviewed some of the planners in the country. I mean, I'm a lawyer, I end up working a lot with engineers and planners, given the work that we're doing. But the long-term planning is something that is lacking. So what you find is that by law, the county governments are required to then have CIDP, that's a County Integrated Development Plan, and a spatial plan. So these plans then are meant then to be integrated to a larger national government plan. But very few, so while every county is now at the second 5-year CIDP, you find that these are just replications of the same thing. They are regurgitations of what was meant to have been done, previously, just a long list of not very well thought out projects. Very few county governments have a complete spatial plan. I think only 2 have tried to take them to the county assembly for approval, or have managed to get them to approval. And without without long-term comprehensive plans, then how do you then determine, if you don't have, say, for instance, just your generic spatial plan with the different zones, this is high density, this is commercial, this is industrial, then how do you then plan for the infrastructure that's needed? How do you develop a service master plan? So the key components that are needed then to be able to identify how much money is needed by these county governments are missing: your infrastructure plan, your service master plan. So the long-term planning really, really is important. As I said earlier, we have the ability, or the bandwidth, not bandwidth actually, we have the capacity to be able to raise county bonds. You're based in South Africa. The city of Joburg has raised, the city of Cape Town, they've raised bonds. Even some of the utilities, like Joburg Water, and I think City Power have actually raised bonds for their needs and for them to be able to service, to service their residents. But we haven't yet gotten to that level. And one of the key challenges, of course, is, you need to be rated, and, and rating requires that you need to have the capacity to run your city in a very specific way, proper planning, and then, the right resources, human capacity, funds are allocated correctly, really having your systems in place to be able to manage these resources. Transparency and accountability is really, really lacking in a lot of these county governments. And therefore you find, it's really difficult for them then to go out to the markets to raise the necessary financing. So capacity building is something that will need to happen definitely for these cities to be able, and municipalities and counties to be able to raise, to think outside the box as far as raising financing is concerned. So when we talk about credible teams with a track record of success in terms of how they manage the resources, how they account for them, how they allocate their resources, collect, that is something then that would definitely help, broaden the scope of resources that are available. So, so the over-reliance on the national government transfers, and then the money you're collecting from, market fees, sales levies, such ridiculous small amounts, you're then able to, as a county government, to go bigger, go out to market, go to the capital markets, structure proper PPPs, that then attract the right caliber of investors, and then with the long term, then broaden the resources that are available to you. And then, of course, I think one of the things that we're really, really lacking is a proper development bank. I know we have something called the Development Bank of Kenya, but when you ask people, that we don't really know what that is. And if you think about the restrictions that are placed on county governments as far as borrowing is concerned, that we just spoke about, if you have say the equivalent of DBSA. We know DBSA, for instance, has been so instrumental in financing municipalities as far as their energy needs are concerned, their transportation needs, health, education. We need something like that. And it doesn't look like anybody's really looking or thinking through what this institution would look like, or how the current DBA, Development Bank of Kenya could be restructured to play this role. So there are opportunities for exploring and broadening the financing available. So we rely less on national government transfers, and of course rely less on, and then have the concessional financing then being utilized towards other things, some of the more social social infrastructure that is needed in the country.
Looking at development fees, are they a viable mechanism for bridging such funding gaps?
Development fees, very exciting development in the country. It's something that was introduced about 2 years ago under the new Physical and Land Use Planning Act in 2019. And it's something that we had been advocating for in the work that we were doing with our colleagues through UN Habitat. And this was then inserted, came in through Section 63, that then allows the county executive committee member that is responsible for planning to then levy a development fee against specific development applications. So this would include things like subdivision plans, schemes, amalgamations, building plans, master plans, because currently, you'll find that property developments are popping up everywhere. And then you don't have the necessary infrastructure to service those developments. So you find that, for instance, in Nairobi, where I live, a lot of single dwellings, that were perhaps on 1 acre of land, are now housing 3 or 4 blocks of 12 stories each. So you probably have about 100 units on what used to be a single dwelling parcel of land. So the road network is not expanding to accommodate these additional vehicles. The sanitation is not expanding to accommodate the increased number of people, residents living on that parcel of land. And then, of course, the water issues are a challenge. So what you find is then people are digging boreholes, people are using septic tanks, and then, of course, there's the issue of increased traffic and on the roads. So the development fees are really welcome, because one of the things then that will then be mandatory is for the CEC to then compute what would be the applicable development fee that is associated with that intensified land use. So that 1 acre of land that was servicing one household with perhaps 4 people and 2 vehicles, that is now going to service 100 households, 200, 300 people, for instance. So that intensified land use then attracts a development fee, which then means that there has to be associated infrastructure to service that particular development. So if it is properly structured and properly implemented, I think this really will be a game changer for a lot of urban areas. So in lieu of the development fee, then the CEC member can then require that the developer then implement the necessary infrastructure. So, and that infrastructure is not just for that particular development, but needs then to factor in the residents within the area. So for instance, you find that if you are putting up a 12-story, development with 4 blocks that is 500 meters away from the main road, that particular link road that will then, that 500-meter stretch that gets to your development, then needs to be something that has to be constructed, and that would then benefit other people along the along that 500-meter stretch. So it's really a welcome principle development, and what it does then is, if you think about the benefits principle of development or tariff setting, it means that the people who are then associated with that intensified land use are the ones paying for that particular road or paying for the additional water or sanitation infrastructure. So you don't have the entire county having to now pay additional taxes because now there's additional sanitation that is required for 2 or 3 developments. The people who then are going to benefit from that particular development then pay a proportional amount towards the capital, the capex for that infrastructure necessary to service that particular development. And really, it's a win-win for everybody. So we're really, looking forward to proper implementation of this. And part of the work that we did again with UN Habitat was to just develop a framework and a guidebook, a handbook actually, in conjunction with the Ministry of Lands, the State Department of Housing and Urban Development, as well as the Ministry of the State Department of Devolution, to develop a handbook on how to implement development levies. And I was really honored to be part of the team that then developed the regulations that would then operationalize Section 63 of the Physical and Land Use Planning Act. So we're looking forward to this really being implemented and being operationalized, and because it really will be a game changer as far as infrastructure development in urban areas is concerned.
Mary, what is your experience in working with local government in Kenya in implementing such?
This is something new that came in, like I said, in 2019, but our work had started in 2016. So at the time, we noted that, yes, the gaps that the infrastructure financing gaps that I had discussed earlier. And so looking at other jurisdictions, we looked, of course, at North America, we looked at Europe, we looked closer to home, of course, South Africa, and how development charges or engineering service charges or fees were implemented and what they were allocated and how they were used. So we, through UN Habitat, were able to provide some support to a few county governments. We worked first with the county government of Kiambu, we worked with Nyandarua County, we worked with Kajiado County, and through another very specialized program, I think we worked also with the Nairobi County for a very specific, informal settlement called Bukuru. And here it was really just to explore how can we develop a mechanism that then would be utilized towards this infrastructure development. What we found was, of course, quite a bit of resistance. There was excitement on the one hand that, oh, it is possible to do this. But we said, yes, it is done. And this is, if done correctly, you would, of course, need enabling legislation, because at the time, remember, there's no enabling legislation. You need a policy to, developed. And we developed that, the policy framework and a draft bill that could be used at the time. As we were, as this was happening, then, we then, of course, were working to lobby towards now a formalization of this into the new Physical and Land Use Planning Act, and that came in. So then our work then transitioned from just, something that could, from a policy paper and stuff to it's now in the law. We now need just to develop the regulations to operationalize it. So there's some confusion about, we find some resistance, like, and you remember, these are counties that are not even collecting 20% of the property rates that they should be collecting. And then like thinking, okay, should we then add a new tax? We're like, it's not a tax. It is a fee that is directly linked to a very specific service, which is, the provision of the necessary infrastructure for a particular development or for intensified land use. So it is not a tax. And so that is something that that took a bit of time, to explain and to get through. We've had a couple of workshops, and even, and also, at the county level and also at the Ministry of Devolution, and with the State Department, and the State Law Office, because then, as if this is to proceed, then we need the support of the Ministry of Devolution. And the devolution role is because if what we've developed are templates that then can be utilized by any county government, and adapted for their own use, depending on the nuances in their specific jurisdictions. So there was some attempt a long time ago, about 10 years ago, by Nairobi itself to levy, an infrastructure development levy of 0.05% of the value of the, of the value of whatever housing development you were going to put up with the building. But unfortunately, this was not properly implemented. You'd collect the money and then the money was not utilized, was not ring-fenced. So you'll find that what we've developed is very clear that, one, the money collected needs to be allocated and used specifically for that purpose for which it is collected. Number two, it must be ring-fenced into a specific fund. And then, of course, cannot be utilized towards general county needs. You can't then use it to address historical infrastructure backlogs, or to demand that the developer then pays more than is needed for the intensified land use that he's going to be responsible for. So hopefully we provided a good framework for implementation, and we are looking forward to at least the counties that we have tried to work with being able to implement this in due course.
What does the future hold for Kenya's cities and towns when it comes to infrastructure financing?
We've talked about the opportunities and the gaps, and the fact that, if you think about it, like now, for instance, urbanization rate in Kenya alone is 4.3% per annum. So at that rate, we have to just accept that it cannot be business as usual. The resources that are available locally are insufficient, whether it's from national government transfers or the county's own source revenue. So therefore, the different scenarios that we painted before, focus a lot more on using other people's money, focus on PPPs. How do you utilize project finance mechanisms, in this case, through PPPs to then roll out the necessary infrastructure over the long term. So we have, we have a robust piece of legislation that is currently, likely to be overhauled, but even the proposed overhauling will be for really for the benefit of the country, in the sense that some of the gaps that we had identified, several years ago, and that we feel have been a hindrance towards implementation of, fast tracking the implementation of PPPs will be addressed. So we're looking at definitely encouraging a lot more focus on PPPs and project finance as an infrastructure delivery mechanism, and that would really allow the counties and the cities to leverage on other people's money. We know this has been done successfully in the transportation areas, water, sanitation, the hard infrastructure, but also several jurisdictions, even where you come from, have utilized it for softer infrastructure, hospitals and which is a devolved function of government, as well as education. Some education institutions and facilities are also devolved. So hopefully this is something that can be encouraged a lot more. Definitely, with increased capacity building and better management of the cities and urban areas, these cities can approach the capital markets. We want to see more infrastructure bonds and city bonds by Nairobi. I mean, there's no reason why we haven't gotten to that level. We can't be singing the same song and not actually getting our act together. So hopefully in the future, this really has to be something that is properly tapped into. And then, of course, like we've said, the development fees, it's something new. It's something there has been a bit of resistance, but if properly implemented, will definitely address a much needed gap. And people need to know that you can't just develop, you can't go putting up huge structures on 4 acres of land. You've got 6 towers of 30 stories, and nobody's talking about the impact on traffic. Nobody's talking about the impact on water and sanitation infrastructure. It's like, it's really puzzling. So as we get to that point of long-term planning, proper plans, then you have a situation where as a developer, you're working with the city to figure out where you can plug in, as opposed to the city trying to catch up with you. So I really do hope that that with time, this will happen, and that citizens themselves then demand a lot more accountability, transparency. They want predictability. I want to know that I'm not going to wake up and my nice area that I've been living in all of a sudden has become a high density area with no infrastructure to go for it. So urbanization is here to stay. And increasingly so, urban migration is here to stay, and our cities just need to stay ahead of the game, and we hope that they will.
So finally, Mary, what lessons can we draw from other jurisdictions, Africa and globally?
I think one of the things that might surprise, and I don't know how I forgot to mention this actually, and I remember being in Yokohama and meeting with the city officials, and they were so shocked to hear that in Kenya, the law actually sets a threshold of 30% of the total budget of, say, a county government would be allocated towards the development budget. So 70% is for recurrent expenditure, and we found that so strange. I remember when this law was being debated and the regulations were being debated, we were thinking perhaps there was a mistake, that it should have been the opposite, 70-30. And when you look at then, as we've done this work through UN Habitat over the last 5 years, we've realized this really is a misnomer. So if we look at, we looked at Paris, we looked at Tokyo, Yokohama, we looked at even Lagos itself, and you can see that first of all, the development stroke capex budget versus the recurrent expenditure threshold needs to change. So, and we can draw that from other jurisdictions. It's not possible that you have out of 100 million, you're spending 30 million towards development and 70 million towards the people who are doing it makes absolutely no sense. So hopefully that is one thing that we can draw, our government can possibly delve a little bit deeper and see how this can be reversed in Kenya. I think Lagos, I remember we're like, how if Lagos itself is at 55%, why are we at 30%? So that was quite an astonishing thing. Another key lesson, of course, for us is look at how other cities are developing, a lot of focus on transit-oriented development. This is something I think our State Department of Housing has referred to, but we haven't really, and we've seen a lot of emphasis on this by institutions like ITDP. How do we build more areas where, where we have complete live workplace scenarios, so that people are not moved so much from one end of the city to the other. Right now, we have scenarios where people are stuck in traffic for 3 to 4 hours a day, just moving from their place of where they live to where they work. So more, toward planning, that would really, really be great. And then, of course, that means then you're able to have people living, more sustainably, and you're planning your cities. If you think about SDG 11, make cities and human settlements more inclusive, sustainable, resilient. This kind of planning then definitely helps. We're hoping then, of course, then with time, a greater focus on just understanding that we have to be inclusive in how we plan our cities. In our urban areas, you can't leave anyone behind. COVID-19 showed us that. I mean, basic thing of washing your hands, to control, the spread of COVID-19, and then you have informal settlements that have no water, no sanitation infrastructure. I mean, that really was a very glaring gap that all of a sudden then you're saying, how are we going to exclude these people? You can't exclude them because the people who live in informal settlements work in your homes, in your offices, they work in hospitals, in hospitality sectors. So you must invest in across the board, and you can't leave anybody behind. Water infrastructure and sanitation infrastructure is so important. in these areas. And that way, then we know that everybody then is safe. If part of the population is endangered, then everybody's endangered. So I think that for me, the whole thing of leaving no one behind and having more transit-oriented development, higher allocation of your financing towards capex and towards the hard stuff that will help in service delivery is definitely something that we definitely need to focus on. You cannot leave people behind and expect that crime rates will go down, that you'll be building equitable societies. So when you talk about inclusive development then and leaving no one behind, then we're working then towards achieving our SDG goal 11, which is make our cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So without that, then it's just not possible. We have to invest in the infrastructure necessary.